So we will go ahead and kick things off. I know we are right at the top of the hour. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Whose Standard Is It Anyway? This is our first Whose Standard Is It Anyway? So we're really excited to use this format to get to the bottom of some of the questions we hear most frequently from people that come to Rustasy Software asking questions about the e-learning standards and which ones to use. So the format today we'll go through in just a moment, but we will be asking the contestants here today questions that we get most often, and in the spirit of whose standard is, or whose line is it anyway, today, whose standard is it anyway, we will be keeping track of points, but they won't really matter in the end. So before we get too far along, let me introduce myself. I'm the host, Tammy Rutherford, the managing director here at Rustasy Software. And with me today, I have brought three leading standards experts that will be representing their standards of choice. So I will let them handle introductions on their own. And Joe, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Joe Donnelly. I work on the customer support team here at Rustasy Software. I've been at Rustasy Software for going to be 14 years next month. I've been supporting SCORM longer than that. That's me. Chris?
Excellent. Chris?
Yeah, my name is Chris Tompkins. I work here at Rustasy as Director of Sales. I've helped design and architect a bunch of different LMS authoring tool and various other learning applications. I spend my time educating people about these standards and then implementing software solutions that help Rustasy solve those type of problems for our customer base. Brian.
I'm Brian Miller, Director of Engineering here. This is the one panel where I am the most junior employee. I think I've been here almost 10 years, and I started out as doing e-learning standard evangelism type stuff as a developer, writing some open source libraries and such, and then moved on to our product teams. And yeah, so I've touched the standards in a lot of different ways and produced some things that hopefully some of you in the community have even used.
Awesome. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining. So today we are going to dive into the wild world of e-learning standards. We've broken the show out into three different segments to ask our contestants some of what we hear the most here at Rustasy. First, we're going to cover how does your standard work with common tools? Followed by how do you work with new technologies? And we'll wrap things up with a lightning round, that will give you one final push for each contestant to prove to the audience why you are the best standard for this audience's use cases. Also, we love audience participation here. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section or in the chat. We have got Alicia Pack and Tara Mori working behind the scenes, not only handling chat and Q&A, but also these lovely polls. So we actually have our first poll for the day. And this is the standards poll. Which standard are you currently using the most? And we'll give you just a moment to answer that poll really fast. Okay.
Not surprising.
Yes. So clearly the audience overwhelmingly has voted or shared that SCORM is the standard they use most frequently today. So Joe, already I think you might even have an advantage with this audience given that you're representing SCORM as a standard. But
no, I'm super popular.
You are super popular today. So it's early in the day. Let's get on with the show and see if that will really stand by the end of today. And also as a reminder, points don't really matter. So we know a little bit about you, who you are and what you do here at Rustasy, but we want to know a little bit more about your standard. So Joe, tell us a little bit more about the standard. How old are you and what are some things we should know about SCORM?
So today I'm playing the role of SCORM, otherwise known as the Shareable Content Object Reference Model. I was originally released in the year 2000. So, and that was my 1.0 version, which is not really used, although referenced every so often, but I've been around. I have many versions that have been released over the years. And as the poll stated, I'm pretty popular. I am supported in tons of LMSs.
Okay. Joe and SCORM seem very confident in today's conversation. Chris, let's hear a little bit more about you and xAPI.
Yeah, so xAPI is a standard that everyone has heard of at this point. We've been quite loud about it, but it's often a little confusing. xAPI is a communications tool that allows two unrelated learning applications to send a noun, a verb, and an object between them. xAPI can help stitch together a data lake. It can help make a quilt of your learning ecosystem, but it's often complicated. It's often confused with Tin Can and CMI5 and some other things. And while it's exciting and enables all types of new learning modalities, including AR, VR, XR, mobile, and some other things, it's sometimes not the right tool for the job and can often be confusing and more complicated than using a different packaging method if you're into more of a traditional log into your LMS, launch a thing, do a thing, get a report on the other side. xAPI is more of an activity stream of these learners did these things, and larger classes of applications can make sense of the pile of data living inside of that type of lake of activities. So xAPI is certainly the future of this e-learning standards debate, but often needs way more implementation than what you'll find in off-the-shelf products today. And for teams that have custom abilities and a very confusing ecosystem, xAPI can be the right tool in the toolbox. But sometimes xAPI isn't the right fit for every need, and other tools should be more effective.
Okay, that sounds very intriguing and confusing, but I'm excited to dig into it further and hear a little bit more about it as we go on. And finally, CMI5. Brian, tell us a little bit more about you. I think you're the new kid on the block, aren't you?
Yes, compared to these old fogies. However, it is probably not well known that CMI5 actually went to what we would consider a 1.0 version release in 2016. So despite the fact that nowhere near as old as SCORM, nowhere near as popular, there is a fair amount of history already brewing in the CMI5 world. What we're seeing now is that the tooling is catching up with the specification. And the specification really comes down to us learning things, us being Rusticy, us being the industry, us being the standards body, people that work in the standards groups. We learned some things. We learned some things that SCORM maybe didn't excel at, particularly as other outside technologies, cell phones, tablets, simulation systems, VR, all of those kinds of things came into the world. They need to be supported. xAPI was a great start to solving a problem. And is absolutely necessary, even for CMI5. But there is a place where there were some bits that just weren't finished about it, or were expected, frankly, to be taken up by the community and added to. So that's what CMI5 is about. CMI5 is about bringing those two worlds together while having the capability to support new technologies that are coming online.
Interesting. Okay, it's almost like if you took Chris and Joe and mashed them up together, you would get CMI5.
And
please don't do that. Excellent. All right. So before we move on to the first segment, tell us the number one reason somebody should use your standard when it comes to creating content. And Joe, we'll send it back to you again.
Thank you. I would say interoperability. Any course that is created and published as SCORM should be able to behave similarly or the same in any learning management system that supports SCORM. It makes things really easy to move content from LMS to LMS if you wanted to. If you had a certain LMS at one point and then move to another one, you should be able to grab your courses, pop it right in there, get the same level of reporting. Also, if you've got a training delivery system that isn't quite an LMS, same thing. It should just work. The big thing about SCORM is that it might be old, but it's reliable.
Okay, old and reliable. That's SCORM. Quote
and maybe
Joe Donnelly. Okay, Chris.
Yeah.
Tell us the one reason somebody should use xAPI for content.
When you have learning, training, real world job performance that lives outside of a launchable moment in an LMS, xAPI can be a way to help all of those unrelated systems let the training and learning professionals understand what's happening. So continuing education credits in an LMS is good, but the simulations, the training, the hands-on activity, what you do in the real world on the shop floor while you're working and doing your day-to-day job, all of that data is often tracked in unrelated systems. And xAPI can be a common language that communicates to a neutral place, a learning record store, an LRS, to help teams understand, even though these tools don't play nicely with one another necessarily, we're not launching things from an LMS using xAPI. xAPI is saying across all of these learners, here are how people are learning, training, engaging, and doing their job, so that we can measure who are the rock stars on staff at actually doing the job, what kind of training and learning experiences do they have, and how do we go invest in more of the things that we know move the needle. xAPI is a standard that helps maintain that neutrality to create a database that has interesting activities inside it from many unrelated sources. But it's not a launchable moment. That's what Tin Can was attempting to do. And xAPI is not necessarily Tin Can. Tin Can will probably go away on a long enough timeline. And that's a great segue into Brian and CMI5.
Yeah, so I'm going to steal both of their answers and then I'm going to put them together. So the reason to use CMI5 is semantic interoperability, right? So Joe is absolutely right. You can make sure things interoperate, but then you have to get your data. And you gotta have ways to massage and look at it, report on it, do all the things, which are really hard in SCORM. xAPI provided this tremendous way to communicate data, but there's no actual understanding there. What does this data mean? So in CMI5, we put these two things together. We say, you're going to have a launchable moment, even if you only care about that one tiny moment. Give me a credential, give me a way to talk to something, and then also help me understand the data that I'm going to get. We're going to segment it into a session. We're going to give you a way to key off of that data so that you know exactly what that data means when it gets into one of those other systems that isn't the LMS. And so it's really putting those two things together. Those are the things that I alluded to earlier that we've learned over the years, is that people want better, cool data, but it turns out if we get better, cool data and we try and use different systems, those systems have to understand the data in the same way.
Excellent. All right. Okay. So now that we've met everybody, we have a good idea of what your primary use case is, or the primary benefits for using your standard. Let's dig into how you work with common learning tools. So first up, I want to tackle the topic of learning management systems. They're kind of a big deal out there. I think most companies, most people that are here today might even use one for their learning and training needs. So what I would love to hear from each of you is, how do you handle launching content in an LMS? And this time we're going to mix things up. We're going to start with you, CMI5. We've heard you seem to be the last one that answers questions, so we're going to give it back to you and let you start this one first.
How to even start? So yeah, the problem at the moment is adoption, right? Like, so we have to have enough people using both sides of this equation to make it a valuable play. And so right now I handle launching content by a standard launch URL that provides the minimum amount of information I need to be effective in creating a session. And that's an actor. That's the actual activity that we're doing. It's the credential we need to capture data and the place that we need to capture data to. So that's really, really how we work with this notion of an LMS, with this notion of a launch moment. And from there, we can do a lot of things around capturing data that's important to that launch session. So we know that we can capture data from the LMS side, we can capture data from the content side or the AU side. And both of those things become really important for saying, yes, this learner is actually in my experience. Everything's set up and ready to go. And then we can also note that the session ends at some point. So that can lead to a moment where a reporting system or a data analytics tool can say, I know that this experience had a start and an end. And that becomes really important inside this context of the launch moment and the session concept. And that allows the LMS to be deliberate about what it knows the learner is doing and experiencing.
Excellent. Okay, so an LMS is a key component in CMI5. It is, or a launching system. When we say LMS, a lot of times you might hear LXP or other acronyms out there, but for today, and just to keep things simple, when we say LMS, that's what we mean, is really where does a learner log into something to go take a piece of training that they've been assigned or discover.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so LMS is a key part of CMI5 and a necessary requirement to actually handle anything that's CMI5 related.
That's correct.
Great. All right. So we're going to go over to Joe over at SCORM. Tell us what it looks like for SCORM with an LMS. How do you handle launching content?
So it kind of feels like we were made for each other. We communicate so well. What ends up happening is after you've imported your course imported one of my courses into an LMS, it is launched. The content will ask the LMS for the SCORM API, and that handshake starts happening. And then that's where the magic is. We start communicating via JavaScript through get and set value calls to get data that the LMS has that we might want to use or have stored previously, or set new things like status or score or time. I don't want to get too much into data because I have a feeling that we're going to be talking about data soon. But we have this connection where we can pass things back and forth until we're done, and a terminate or LMS finish call is set, and then we decide to go our separate ways. But really, we both need each other to communicate and to launch, and so we were built for each other. We're like chocolate and peanut butter.
Excellent. All right. Yes, it sounds like you and the LMS are quite close. So let's go over to xAPI, and Chris, tell us your relationship with an LMS.
Yeah, so xAPI could be in a situation that has very little to no relationship with an LMS. xAPI can be used for all types of things. In a simulator, Chris did this. In a work performance application, Chris did this. That's all xAPI is trying to do. And it normalizes all of those statements into a special database called a learning record store, an LRS, that keeps up with those so that an analytics program can make sense of what's going on. Sometimes LMSs might use xAPI to share the activity data from inside their own portal with that larger learning record store. But there is also something called a tin can package. xAPI was birthed from Project Tin Can, which was our first investigation into the standard back in 2016, 2013. And when we started to evolve those things, we ended up with a tin can package that some LMSs and some authoring tools can use as a connection method. Many of the authoring tools out there can output a tin can zip file, and some LMSs out there have a player for tin can, but it takes special effort in both the content creation and the content playback. Needs a player, needs an authoring product, and those two things can go together. To be really transparent, adoption of that is pretty low, and I think on a long-term strategy, I would much prefer CMI5 to replace a tin can package, but there is a slight relationship between a launchable moment in an LMS through tin can to track basic stuff inside the system, but xAPI can be so much more, and xAPI wasn't ever really intended to be a launchable package like CMI5 or like AICC or like SCORM. It was intended to be a communications model. So how these things work within an LMS could be that the LMS translates the activity into xAPI statements and pipes them out into another LRS, or it could be more of a launchable thing for tin can. Depends on the goals and the ecosystem that an organization has as to which of the xAPI strategies could work best for them.
Excellent. Okay. You mentioned learning record store. So why don't we talk a little bit? I think we have a good idea about what an LRS means to xAPI. It seems like it's a core component of the standard and necessary to store those statements. SCORM, Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. How does an LRS relate to the SCORM standard?
It's an LRS.
Or
we
does
don't
it?
need.
So it sounds
Yeah,
like
we don't need one. We don't need one. So we are going to communicate directly with the LMS. The LMS will store the data in their tables and report off of it from there.
I see. And CMI5, tell us what the relationship is with the learning record store and you, if there is one.
Oh, there is one. So absolutely. CMI5 actually has xAPI as a dependency. CMI5 doesn't work without it. You have to have an LRS. You have to have a launching system and an LRS, and those two are generally either tightly or loosely coupled. It doesn't really matter to CMI5. Once you get past this moment of launch, the CMI5 assignable unit for those AICC fans in the crowd talks directly to that LRS. It is what is using it. It is using as its storage layer. So we don't work without xAPI. We don't work without an LRS.
All right. Excellent.
And I think there was even a question. So CMI5 can't collect data outside the LMS like xAPI can. Is that correct? No, that's specifically not correct. We are intentionally trying to do things using xAPI.
Great. That actually brings us to the next topic, which we've already started getting to, which is data and what kind of data can you track, and what does that look like? So we'll start with Joe. So we'll start with SCORM here, and tell us the data that you can track about a learner using SCORM.
I can track a lot of things. Have you seen my specs? There's lots of them. There's many.
I hear it's
pages.
like 1,000 pages long.
I'm sure my 1.2 spec is, and then we can talk about the other ones later. There's so many of them, but we can track a lot of the things that folks really look for in reporting. I know we refer to the big four over here. So your completion status, success status, score and time. Lots of folks, that's all they need. But the good news is if you use my SCORM 2004 version, it really opens up a door to even more reporting, or at least more robust reporting. Things like full question and answer text for the interactions model. Lots of people like to create reports based upon their quizzes, so they can see, what people are answering. Are they getting it correct? If they have a question that isn't performing the way they want it to, they can take a step back and look at, hey, well, all these people got this incorrect. What are they answering? Is there something in that answer that maybe points them towards the content they need to clean up something in there? But not only that, if you dive deeper into the spec and maybe go a little bit further into it, you can report on objectives and many other things. So the key is the spec has all of the definitions for all of the things that I can report, but really big four and interaction data, that's really what people are looking for.
I see. Okay, excellent. And Chris, on the xAPI front, what kind of data can you track?
Whatever you want. Any noun, any verb, and any object. There are very little rules around it, which is one of the biggest challenges and complications to the standard, is that with great freedom comes great responsibility. You could say Chris fired a weapon. Great. You could say Chris fired an employee. Okay. You could say Chris fired a kiln. That's all appropriate xAPI behavior. But what Chris is firing there begins to matter. Statement design should be intentional. How these applications put things together should matter. And it's intentionally loose so that we don't end up in a situation like SCORM had, where somebody pulls out a 5G connected iPad and says, I want to learn on this. And we go, SCORM didn't even know such a thing would exist when it was created. And while some of that can still work with SCORM, it's uncomfortable. It's not a modern way that software behaves. xAPI is this lasting approach to helping learning and training data get consolidated in a place that can be understood by custom applications sending that data, by traditional LMSs, by traditional content, or by AR, VR, XR events that are happening in real time inside of a simulation. And All of those things matter. But xAPI gives you a ton of freedom to help things communicate what needs to be communicated, but it means that some of the biggest challenges are put on the data analytics side. The piece of software on top of an LRS that looks into this pile of different statements created by many different applications saying seemingly different things, and understanding what are the actionable insights that a training group can take from all of this strange data living in our learning record store. So xAPI is not intending to be a launchable thing that solves the big four. xAPI is designed to help an organization understand what's happening in the context of what matters to them. And that type of freedom means that there needs to be some premeditation in how you're formatting those statements, what you want to see, and the end in mind for these xAPI studies becomes a very crucial core component of using xAPI in a large ecosystem. Is please use it with intentionality.
So it sounds like with great freedom comes great responsibility when it comes to xAPI.
Typically, yes.
Otherwise,
xAPI
you're going to end up
you...
with a pile of statements that might not all relate to each other unless you had a model or a profile in mind when you were doing them. Okay.
And there
excellent.
are strategies, profiles, models, registries, recipes, lots of different concepts to help wrangle those things together. But it's not a problem that the standard is intentionally trying to solve. The standard is trying to be broad. Send your activity data to one spot, and then the effort is studying what you collected.
I see. All right. Well, this comes to CMI5, and the word profile just showed up, and I think that might be related to CMI5. Tell us a little bit more about your data profile.
Yeah, it is. And first, I'd like to say that I hope no one's printing out the 1,000 pages. I come from a time when you don't print out a specification and put it in a white binder on the bookshelf. Sorry, Joe. Yes, so CMI5 is known as a profile of xAPI. So what does that mean? It means that with that, all of that responsibility, yeah, you're going to have a problem even just getting started. Where do you start? CMI5 is often the best place or a good place to start because there have been lots of people over the last 8 years or so thinking about this problem of xAPI from this standpoint, from the notion of what does it mean to take a learner and put them together with an experience? You know, there's this concept of a registration. Okay, well, we use that. What happens when this learner experiences something multiple times? Well, that ends up being a session. So we're in multiple sessions. So we start out by giving you just enough cookbook to get started. You have all of this wonderful ingredients that you can use or that you may have come up with, but how the heck do you start making a pie? Well, we're going to use a recipe. We're going to use a profile to put those ingredients together so that they have some sort of meaning, so that you have an end product that you can expect to achieve. And from there, you can get fancier and fancier and fancier. You can add more data. You can use more profiles wrapped by this cushion of CMI5 that gives you the starting place that you need. You know, if you're in a very large development community, or you're an academic, or you're just doing research, maybe it's fine that you're going to turn out a one-off data thing that targets very specifically the question you're asking. But if you're looking for a general solution that you can go out to the world with and know that it's going to be around for a long time and that it gives you the flexibility to capture whatever you want, then that's where CMI5 shines.
I see. Okay. Last question around data for the moment. What happens next? How flexible are you? Are you able to, is your data shareable across systems, or where does it live and how do people get to it? Let's see, I'll give xAPI a chance to start first this time.
Sure. So there's a lot of questions in the chat around tin can out of authoring tools and things, and that's one of the ways. That's tin can. I think over time we'll start to see CMI5 replace the tin can pieces, but it is an important concept and it should achieve parity with SCORM in what it's trying to achieve. Tin can's trying to communicate time, completion, pass, fail, score, and that's roughly the basics of what happens out of a launch. Data portability, though, is really interesting in these moments. It allows xAPI to pack up its toys and go send them to any other LRS. LRSs are designed to pipe statements or statement forward to other LRSs, allowing multi-tenanted type of data studies. The simulation creator might want aggregate stats about how their product's being used. The consultant who uses that simulator to teach someone a skill might want stats so that they can become a better trainer. The company might want statements for compliance needs, and the employee might want to take those with them somewhere else. So one xAPI statement might end up living in many different LRSs in real time or forwarded around in other times. And that's new to the e-learning standards world. Typically, data has been locked away in the system that launched it, and with xAPI, it's now more portable.
Excellent. We'll go to you, our old friend SCORM and Joe. And speaking of data portability, how does SCORM handle it? Is it shareable across systems?
So data portability isn't really my thing, but as we talked about at the top of the show here, moving SCORM courses from an LMS to an LMS or from system to system, I can certainly help with that. But these other standards probably handle it way better than I do, the data portability piece.
Excellent. And CMI5.
I hope there aren't any Pins fans in the crowd.
We don't have time for that topic today. CMI5.
I mean, you get the best of both worlds with CMI5. You get the wonderful flexibility of capturing anything you want, so long as it can fit inside of the session model, which it can. And yeah, you can pipe out your data. You can take it to your analytics tool, and hopefully that analytics tool will even be able to understand it a little bit better. And I will take issue with something Chris said when he was speaking of his cousin Tin Can. And that is, there's nothing in the Tin Can launch guidelines about capturing any data. In fact, you don't even have to use xAPI with them. It's just a launch guideline.
I'm
with
glad you
great
brought that up.
freedom.
So I feel like the chat, by the way, I want to thank everybody. The chat and the QA has been blowing up since we've been talking. So we're really enjoying all of these questions coming in. And it seems like there is still a lot of discussion going on with the Tin Can and the xAPI and what people are using out there. So before we go any further, I do want to make sure we sort of pause here for a moment and clear some of those things up. If you are using an xAPI publish option in your authoring tool, it sounds like we have a few people doing that today with Captivate and Storyline. That is fine. That is great. If you have a place to take that content, we're all about interoperability. And that's the one thing that every standard up here today is working towards. And the purpose of them is to make sure that whatever you build acts and behaves similarly across whatever system or place you want learners to access it from. And so as long as you have a way to deliver an output from your authoring tool that might be called xAPI or Tin Can or anything else, make sure that the system that you need that to be delivered from can handle it. That's really the most important piece here. The benefit, as you've heard, for starting to incorporate xAPI or CMI5, or even if it's still referred to as Tin Can API, is really additional data. So SCORM told us really clearly, these are the things I do well, and it's interoperability and it's a set of data. As we start moving across the podium and talking to xAPI and CMI5, we see that that's where places start to open up for collecting more information and data. So that's really the important part here. As you start to move past SCORM and publish as different standards, think about why you're doing that and making sure that you're getting the value out of doing that, and that it's going to be compatible with whatever systems you also have to work with. So hopefully that clears up a little bit of that. Also, I think we've had a couple of questions about, hey, we'd love a resource to see what all of these standards look like next to each other. There will be some great resources set after the session today. So I just want to make sure everybody realizes we are reading your questions and we are going to get to some of them in the session today, and we'll have lots of follow-ups as a result. So last, I want to wrap up here on the common learning tools, because I feel like that's where everybody is really spending time today and trying to solve challenges. So for each of you, if someone's considering buying a new LMS, and it feels like that happens often, people are constantly evaluating LMSs out there or additional learning platforms, should they include a checkbox in their RFP for your standard? And if so, why? SCORM?
So one, as we discussed once again at the top, I'm super popular. Everybody's got a SCORM course somewhere. Even if you are using Tin Can or CMI5, chances are you've got a folder somewhere that has SCORM stuff in it. I have the data that you want to report on. Yes, my spec has guardrails, and I'm very specific about what you can do and say, unlike xAPI. But chances are you want to report on completion, success, score, time, maybe some interactions, which is great. But we have what you need. And then lastly, we've got 20 years of people implementing SCORM. People have done this for a long time. And so I'd like to say there aren't any surprises, but it's software and there's always surprises. But people have done it, and people will continue to do it.
All right. Excellent. CMI5, tell us if so, why somebody should add CMI5 as a checkbox in their LMS RFP.
Well,
and for those of you out there, request for proposal. So if you're going to buy something new, there's a ton of acronyms out there, but this is more of a business one versus a standard. So,
well, you absolutely should. I mean, I'm assuming that the reason why you're looking at a new LMS is that you're not satisfied with your current one, or that you're implementing one from the start. So, you're probably interested in more data than just completion, or just the time it took someone to do something, or at least you will be eventually. And it's that forward-thinking moment of, if I'm going to do something, I'm gonna prepare myself for the future, and the future is more data capture. The future is leveraging more than one system. And so you're going to need that capability, even if you don't know or don't recognize that you need it today. If you're reevaluating your LMS, you're probably looking to add that in the future. And so your LMS vendor, even if they don't support CMI5 already, you probably are looking for a vendor that's at least paying attention to this industry, paying attention to what's going on in the compliance training or education space. And so they should at least have it on their radar to be looking at what CMI5 can do for them in the future and what it can do for their customers. So even if they don't have it now, you asking that question of them puts it on their radar if it wasn't already, and make sure that they're paying attention to your needs. And it's your needs they should be satisfying. I think a lot of them will also find out that they may already, if they're using e-learning standard support, they may already have pieces of CMI5 in place. Maybe they have an LRS. So maybe now they just need the launch moment and the data validation side of CMI5. Maybe they're using a product that already supports multiple learning standards. And if they do, it may be a much lighter lift for them than they even realize to get CMI5 support for you.
Excellent. Okay. And lastly, xAPI, should you even be on an RFP for an LMS?
Danger, danger. It depends. Do it with intent. If you have an LRS already that has a data analytics layer on it, xAPI might be a core part of what you ask a vendor to provide, because you're already building an ecosystem and know what to do. But if you ask these vendors for custom xAPI statements, that's complicated, could be considered custom work. If you don't have a plan and you haven't designed what you're going to do with all of that, adding it as a requirement could fundamentally change the price and the complexity and everything else. So using xAPI is certainly something that is important. And I would love for every learning platform to have an LRS that you could start to send custom things to. But just a blanket requirement for it in an RFP can often be confusing for procurement and vendors and buyers and everyone else, unless you're super specific about xAPI is a core part of this requirement, and here are the profiles or the design statements that we would expect a vendor to send. Because just putting it there could be very easy or very hard to check a box, and both could be right answers, and neither could be what you want. So do it with intentionality.
There's a common theme here with xAPI. It means lots of different things, or it can mean lots of different things to lots of people, whether it's a statement or the actual business use case. So maybe I'm hearing a little more definition is always required. So that's something important we'll want to be thinking about with xAPI going forward. So we've talked about a lot of the common tools we use today, authoring tools and learning management systems. One question that comes up frequently in the chat is, how easy are you to implement? And SCORM, what does it look like if somebody wants to use you as a standard today?
So ease of implementation, well, learning standards are hard. There are a lot of people out in the world to help you, but for SCORM, you have to have two sides of the coin here. You've got your player, so your training delivery system, your learning management system. Someone has to implement SCORM. Now, I was bragging about my spec earlier. This is where it kind of, it makes things a little bit hard, is that I do have 1,000-page specs that I do have printed out in my office, Brian. But there are a lot of rules, there are a lot of things to cover. And that's where there are folks out in the community that have solved the player side of things. And it's probably best to go with one of those versus writing your own. Chris would be happy to talk to you about that. And then
it sounds like
it sounds
like there's, in the interest of time, I'm going to rush you all along a little bit so we get to more conversations and topics. But it sounds to me like what I'm hearing is you've been around for a long time and there's lots of tools already available in the market that support SCORM. So you could build it yourself if you wanted to, but you could also simply use something that's already been built and created today and be off and running pretty quickly.
Absolutely. If somebody's already done the work, you should check that out.
Excellent. All right. Going across, Chris, I feel like this could be a loaded question for xAPI. But tell us today, how quickly can you get implemented, and are there tools available and products that support xAPI today to make that easy?
A lot of free and open source LRSs. It's a known problem. So if you want to get something that can send it, plenty of options on the market, turnkey, host it yourself, get a SaaS one, lots of free trials, plenty of products to choose from. To make your own custom statements, xapi.com/libraries has a collection of free and open source client libraries that could allow you to build your own custom statements from whatever learning experience you have, including AR, VR, XR, mobile, whatever. But they just end up in an LRS. So from a minimally viable, can you implement this? Probably this afternoon, quick and easy, but the complicated stuff is in the strategy of how you do those things.
Got it. And CMI5, how easy is it to get started today? Are there lots of products on the market that support you?
I wouldn't go with lots of products. There are products. There are products on both sides. There is an open source library for the content side generation. So if you want to create your content, there is sample content from a project called Project Catapult. There's a testing tool that allows you to test your content. There is a testing tool that allows you to make sure your LMS is doing things the right way. So as a former developer with lots of years of experience, I would say it's a little bit easier to get started with CMI5 because it's using modern technologies, JSON web service APIs, using something like xAPI. So if you already have an LRS you like, well, then that's a much smaller lift to add CMI5 to leverage an existing LRS than to write your own LRS even. So there are tools available, not as many as there could be or will be, but it's definitely the right growth path for that set of tools.
Excellent. All right. Oh, so let's switch gears now. Right before we head into the lightning round, one last question prior to that is talking about newer technologies. So we've talked a lot about things we're familiar with, LMSs, authoring tools, but how do you standards relate to some of the newer technologies out there like VR, simulation, serious games? xAPI, I think you mentioned it a little while ago. So we'll start with you. How does xAPI relate to, if it does, some of these newer training modalities?
Yeah, great question. I mean, and newer is a subjective term. We've had live hands-on training, big simulators for years and years and years. And to be able to say this really complex simulation needs to send a green check mark somewhere else is one of the ways that xAPI might solve that problem. But it could be very expressive and become a part of nearly anything, a face-to-face meeting, attending a conference, hanging out on a webinar, learning things, being in VR, shooting a weapon, firing a kiln. All of those things can be done easily, quickly, and flexibly using xAPI if you have the necessary plumbing in place.
Okay. And CMI5, to you, I would imagine, just given your relationship with xAPI, the answer here might be a little similar.
Yeah, it is. We can use all of that, except for the problem still becomes, how do you get that experience going? How do you get that person into the simulator? How do you get them into the VR headset with their authentication, with their, even their name, what activity they're doing? How do you understand that data when you get it back? And that's where CMI5 comes in. It gives us this point where you're going from usually one system where you've been assigned or suggested or, provided access to this thing, and it's going to get you into that experience, whether that's a separate headset or a mobile app or whatever. And so that's where CMI5 comes in. It lets you make that jump with the stuff you need. So I hear about people putting these two guys together where it's like, oh, I have this SCORM package and I want to capture my data using xAPI. The aha moment becomes, well, how do you get the credential to store that stuff in the LRS? And how do I keep that in a place that's safe? And the answer is you can't really. So that's where CMI5 comes in. I provide the handshake that allows you to talk to the LRS to capture the data you want when you've been launched.
Okay, so if we take that a little bit further in the context of newer technologies, it could be anything. So you could actually, using CMI5, launch somebody from an LMS or other launching system into virtually any training activity. It doesn't matter. I think somebody asked a question earlier about domains. So there is no limitation around where you send the learner next, provided they have that authentication makes that handshake and access work well together. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right. Yeah, the cross-domain issue is no longer an issue. And I'll even say, if you have live training, probably that live training session is started by an instructor. Somebody is leading that training. So they could even click the button that says, this live training is starting. And that starts up a CMI5 session. So you want to capture the data somewhere. The concept of launch doesn't have to be in a browser in a URL. It's just, this thing has started.
Mm-hmm. What's wild to me is that you're just describing a live training session, and we're also thinking about that as a newer technology because it's just that hard to integrate live experiences back into a digital platform. So that's pretty wild. SCORM, we'll wrap this one up with you, and I think we might know where this one's going to head pretty quickly. But given your age, how are you with some newer technologies?
And my answer will be short. You won't have to hit the wrap it up button on this one, but yeah, I would concede to the other standards on this one. I have been around. I predate a lot of the more fun technologies that revolve around simulations. However, if you do have a tool that creates a simulation that can apply me to it, then I'd happily be launched in an LMS and maybe get some of the data. But I think what Chris was saying earlier about the data you can get out of these types of activities is probably more versed for them, for that standard for CMI5.
Excellent. All right, we are going to move into the lightning round, folks. As we've got about 10 minutes left, we're going to ask three final questions, but we are going to keep it brief, contestants, as we want to make sure that we look at some other questions from everybody before we wrap up for the day and have one final poll. So we'll go from right to left this time, my right. tell me one thing you do better than any other standard. Contestant CMI 5, you begin.
I ascribe meaning in a relatively simple fashion. No sequencing here. No requirements of menu structures. No requirements of overthinking your data just to get started.
Excellent. xAPI, how about you?
I help gather information from unrelated and disparate learning and training systems so that teams can understand holistically what's going on inside their ecosystem.
Excellent. And finally, SCORM.
Yeah, those are great answers. Well, as I've said before, I have the data that you need to report on. It is simple, but I am well supported. I'm a popular standard. Everybody supports me, but I can get you those things that you want, the Big Four and the interaction data. It's all there.
Excellent. All right. We've already covered this, but just as we sort of come into the final stretch here, adoption for your standard today, SCORM, it sounds like you've got wide adoption out there, just given the legacy of your standard and the length of time you've been around.
Yeah, most LMSs, training delivery systems, are going to support SCORM by default. So I am going to be around in most of those scenarios. SCORM 1.2 is still arguably the most popular standard out there. Yeah, I'm out there. Everybody supports me.
Excellent. xAPI.
There are a whole class of off-the-shelf products that can help you by many different vendors. It's a core part of how communication is done, and I think it has a very bright future. It's implemented in bespoke ways at the moment because of the data model and the premeditation that's necessary for it to be successful, but there are a lot of tools to help you get started right away. There's a full open source set of libraries to help people approach this more efficiently. And it has been in the world and will continue to grow.
And CMI 5.
CMI 5 is on the growth path. That's it. There's, I would say, limited adoption at the moment, but the tooling is maturing. The expectations by the standards people that work on standards groups is that it's the way to bridge this gap that we have from something that has been extremely popular, something that provided us with the possibilities of the future, and now let's actually get there. So on the growth path.
Excellent. All right. Before we wrap up, a couple of questions from the audience. And I think David's got a great question here, and it's really how does some of this stuff work and what does it look like under the hood? I think it's really about packaging and what's the difference between a SCORM package and a CMI 5 package or even xAPI. And this word package throws people off a lot. And so I think we all understand the concept of a SCORM package. It's really what's different between that and a CMI 5 package and even an xAPI package like we talked about earlier.
I'm gonna jump in here.
Okay.
So yeah, the difference is a CMI 5 package is just enough information to get a user into an experience. And that's really the extent of it. So with SCORM, you had to bundle all of your stuff up along with some metadata, and you had to ship that thing out into the world. For those of you that know my cousin AICC, who I think is on holiday this week, you can have your content live somewhere else. It is a remote thing. You can launch into that piece, and the only thing that goes in the package at that point is the metadata necessary to tell that launching system how to launch it. And that's the extent of it. So it can be both of those things. You can ship the whole ball inside of a package. You can send it off to an LMS and they can play it, or you can do the thing like AICC used to do, which is to launch into what's called an assignable unit. And it receives all of the data during that initialization process to then communicate with the LMS where it lives, even if the content itself isn't inside of that LMS.
Excellent. Thank you for clearing that up. I think that's definitely a question that lots of people have on their minds. Looks like we have our poll. Tara has just posted another poll for us to sort of wrap things up as we come to the end of today. So tell us, after hearing from all of our contestants, which standard is the one that you're thinking most about using today based on what you need to be doing with your learning and training? Ooh, so, oh my goodness, this is very interesting. So obviously, CMI5 has made a very compelling case for themselves today. And Joe and SCORM, you're still hanging on by a thread here, but there's definitely a more balanced response after going through some of the topics today. So one thing we've been joking about here is, points and that they don't really matter, and they don't. So the one thing we really focus on here at Rustici is using the right standard or tool in the toolbox for you and what you're doing. And this isn't a contest. These standards aren't competing against each other. They should be complementing each other. And there is definitely room and space for using all three of these standards in your learning, depending on what your needs are. And Duncan, yes, I appreciate it. Points always matter in lots of places, but not today. So we do really encourage you every time we talk to people, and we talk to them every day about this problem. We say, use the right tool in the toolbox. And, that's Chris's favorite saying. You could use, a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, but that seems like it's a really inefficient use of your strength and power, and it's not the right thing to use. So when it's right, use SCORM. If you're already using SCORM today for your content, that might be the tool that you need. As you start to expand and think about newer technologies or experiences for your learning and training, maybe then you start bringing in xAPI or CMI5. So really be intentional and not just follow the buzzword, and not abandon something if it's really the thing that's right for you and works best for your organization. So we'll always want you to take that away. There have also been a couple of other questions about, what about AICC? What about LTI? We would love to have all of the standards on one of these panels. In the interest of time, we have focused on these three. They're also the three standards we hear the most questions about here at Rustici. But their AICC is an older standard. You'll still see it out there, but so it's one that we still support in our products, and we see it widely used across the community, but it is on the older side of things. And LTI is one that we'll see most often in more of the education and academic environments. It's definitely starting to show up more in some of the enterprise tools. So there are other tools out there to use. We're here to help you. So please, if you have questions about the standards we covered today or other standards that you're curious about, come to Rustici and ask us anything. We're here to help. And I also want to thank not only our contestants, Joe, Chris, Brian. In the background and behind the scenes are Tara and Alicia, who have been handling our Q&A and chat and polls and putting these amazing backgrounds around us. The immersive background in Zoom is a lot of fun to work with, and they've been the masterminds in the production of today's event. And we'll be following up with you and sending a lot of the questions that came out today. We'll be doing some follow-ups with you and provide you some information after the session. But again, thank you for joining. Whose standard is it anyway? We hope you learned something, and welcome your feedback.
Great job by our host, Tammy.
Thanks, Tammy.
I feel like we need some outro music, but we haven't gotten that sophisticated yet.
Chris is going to say.